In support of his parallel, both the coffin text and the pyramid text reference opening or splitting the sky's iron door, descending on iron bands, and other iron references, showing that the Egyptians may have understood the dynamics of Earth's iron core and magnetosphere. Also important is that the ions are trapped or frozen on magnetic field lines. Particles move with field lines, so a moving field line means a moving string of plasma particles on a common field line. Magnetic reconnection creates open field lines or earth field lines that have stretched, finally snapping and splicing into an adjacent solar field line. When the deceased splits the sky's iron door or descends upon iron bands or ferries on reed floats, these symbolic phrases may point to the dynamic energy network of moving magnetic field lines within the Sun-Earth system that the Egyptians may have perceived decoded. Decreased on iron bands or reed floats equals ion on magnetic field lines. The district of water with ropes of iron. Imperishable stars, Orion, Sirius, and the Unrulian stars, pole stars, pilot and towed the deceased over the district of waters with ropes of iron, considering that the European Space Agency's cluster spacecraft discovered actual waves along the ever-shifting boundary of the magnetopause. We could say that the magnetopause is a district of waters. Also in space physics, bundles of magnetic field lines generated by the Earth's iron core move tailward until the field lines are disconnected. Called flux, they contain a combination of closely closed, open, and solar wind field lines that could easily be described as iron ropes of iron. Richard investigated the origins of the ions in the magneto-tail flux ropes by launching solar wind ions into electric magnetic fields from a global magneto-hydrodynamic simulation of the magnetosphere. They observed that some particles then drifted onto open field lines and propagated tailward to undergo significant energization when they entered the flux rope. Ultimately, the particles encountered similar field line sequences, finally entering open field lines out of the magnetosphere by reconnection of the dust flank. The flux rope particles experienced three connections: the daylight entry to the magnetosphere, number 2 in the magnetotail, and 3 on the dust flank when they left the flux rope. In comparison to Rich's experiment, the same west to east flux rope transport events that tow ions from the cusp of the magnetosphere to the magnetotail's open field lines could also be described as the deceased being towed over the district of water by ropes of iron so that he can rise in the east on open field lines. This similarly supports our model of the magnetosphere as the duat. Magnetosphere as a duat, I'm sorry. So we can propose the following possible modern science parallels for the Egyptian signs. We'll go ahead and say this here. Ropes of iron equal flux ropes generated by the Earth's iron core. And the district of waters equals the magnetopause. Okay. Scholarly descriptions. Oh, I'm sorry. The Valley of Darkness. Scholarly descriptions of the Duat's shape also support our motto. It was a valley shut in by mountains on both sides, nearly circular in form, and could be entered by a gap in the mountains of the west. A river or current flowed throughout the Duat, and the souls had to travel the dark, dangerous valley line with numerous deities, including friendly and hostile spirits. Translated into 21st century space physics terminology, the Egyptian gap is similar to the northern polar cusp or gap in the Earth's magnetosphere, and the mountain valley is the energy landscape created within the magnetospheric vortex. The Duat's flowing river may relate to the magnetopause's field aligned currents. By using technology, tools, space physics can see similar energy landscapes in the magnetosphere, which they also describe as mountains and valleys. These energy landscapes define the potential energy surface as a function of the position of atoms. The topographical features are similar to the Earth's mountains and valleys, but in a much higher dimension. It is obvious that the Egyptian descriptions of the Duat match up with actual energy landscapes in the magnetosphere that the modern physicists have identified. So our motto is still functional and suggests that the Egyptian ability to perceive the quantum allowed them to see the actual positions of atoms and energy structures. We can decode these landscapes as follows. Egyptian gap equal gap or cusp of magnetosphere. Mountain valley or darkness equals magnetosphere's energy landscapes. The following statement in the Tibetan recension of the Book of Going Forth by Day also supports the idea that the Earth's magnetosphere is the location of the Duat. And it reads, O you two falcons of his, chieftains of their council, who here matters? You are the ones who lead the moored one to the secret place, who drag in Ra, who follows from the upper place, the shrine which is above the firmament, Lord of the shrine which stands within the circumvallation of the earth. Circumvallation of the earth. Circumvallation of the means surrounded by a rampart, which is a mound of earth, raised as a fortification around a place, a barricade. The pyramid texts also refer to the ramparts of Shu, or barriers of air, meta symbols of the Earth's magnetosphere, an actual barricade against solar wind. The other textual reference to who drag in Ra may indicate the polar cusp and the process of the magnetic reconnection, which occurs at different points in the magnetosphere. This constant process of magnetic reconnection drags solar wind plasma to regions around the Earth. As a magnetic field line closes, it grabs a handful of solar wind plasma from the sun's magnetic field and drags it towards the Earth as it moves from night to day. Metaphoric language such as who drag in Ra easily describes this process. Language referring to the Lord of the shrine which stands with the circumvallation of the earth suggests Osiris, who resides in Rosette Jah, meaning place of dragging. Another reference to reconnection. Relating to our model of the magnetosphere as a duat, these Egyptian ideas suggest the following possible modern science parallels. Hu Dragon Ra and rosette J equals magnetic reconnection, and rampart of Shu, magnetic sphere. Ramparts of Shu equals magnetic, magnetosphere. Along with these references, the least corrupted pyramid texts also describe the deceased standing east of the celestial vault. The vault is a construction built of the principle of the ark that covers an area of considerable depth. This description amply defines the three-dimensional image, the magnetosphere envisioned by the spacecraft optical instruments. So it seems reasonable to infer that the ramparts and the vault also point to the Earth's magnetosphere of plasma following to the great east side of the Earth, energy landscape that stretches into a teardrop because of the solar wind force. Decoded. Celestial vault equals magnetosphere. We can conclude then that the earliest conceptions of the shape of the duat from the papyrus of Nu are similar to the two-dimensional image of the Earth's magnetosphere. Also, textual language such as the circumvallation of the Earth, ramparts of Shu, celestial vault, place of dragging, ropes of iron, and the house of Nat are fitting meta symbols pointing to the magnetic spirit energy landscape and process. So the textual language supports the Earth's magnetosphere, where the process of reconnection or dragging of the sun's energy is occurring. It is a significant model for the Egyptian duat. Decoded. Earth's magnetosphere equals duat. Why go to the northern polar region? The stars play an important role in guiding the deceased to the polar region. Orion, Sothis, or Sirius, and the morning star will save him from the range of the dead who go head downwards. Further, Orion lifts up the water of the deceased bark and gives the deceased his wand, while the great bear makes a path for him to the western horizon. The great bear, or Ursa Major, is a constellation visible in the north hemisphere, and the seven brightest stars form the Big Dipper. Draw an imaginary line from the star Merak through Dubhe out of the cup of the dipper, and you will arrive at the tip of the handle of the little dipper, which is Polaris and the North Star. Currently, the Earth's axis rotation points within 1 degree of Polaris. However, in 3000 BCE, it pointed to the star Dubin in the constellation of Draco the dragon. Envisioning the Earth's magnetosphere from a vantage point deep in outer space with the sun on the west, Polaris and the Great Bear will mark the western horizon of the magnetosphere near the northern pole, while the magnetotail stretching eastward in space will mark the eastern horizon. Thus, the Great Bear marks the path to the western horizon. Along with this, the god Horus encourages the deceased to walk on the sky waters with the imperishable and unwearying stars to navigate. Since the Orion star cluster is the site of intense carbon monoxide emission indicating star formation, we can easily classify these stars as imperishable stars. On the other hand, unwearying stars suggest the Great Bear and pole star Polaris, for they do not vary from the pole. Wanted by Orion and guided by the Great Bear and Polaris northward to the western horizon of the magnetosphere, the text encourages the deceased to travel where the pestilence of streams has been removed by the gods, so that the deceased might ascend a ladder or stairway to Ra at the pole of the sky. The Great Polar Region, the Horn, the Northern Polar Region. The Earth's northern polar cusp or horn, where the Earth's magnetic field is at its weakest point, easily matches the Egyptian descriptions decoded. Imperishable stars equal Orion star cluster. Orion stars equal pole stars. Pole of sky, great polar region. The horn equal polar cusp. Escape to the cusp or gap. Bull of Ra bend down horn for dead king to pass. No pestilent stream dead king has power over wind. The weakest point in the Earth's magnetosphere, pause, which is the magnetic boundary between the Earth's field and the solar winds, is referred to as the polar cusp by space physics. Here, there are no pestilent streams or of magnetic fields. NASA first reported that spacecraft such as the European HEOS 1 and HEOS 2 in 1968 and 1972, and the University of Iowa's Hawkeye 1974 observed a disordered magnetic field, weak but not zero, at the cusp regions. Also, the solar wind composition instrument of the spacecraft Ulysses measured good elemental abundance for carbon, oxygen, neon, magnesium, silicon, sulfur, iron, caltech. Some scientists think silicon, which has similar properties to carbon and a high affinity for oxygen, could provide a chemical base for life. Silicon has 4 valence electrons which can bound to 4 other atoms. The National Radio Astronomy Observers list species of the interstellar molecules based on silicon bounded to hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and carbon atoms. It is here at this open element enriched gap to the stars that the deceased king stands at the great polar region as a waterway traveler. The pharaohs may have easily imagined the Earth's polar cusp as the 2 horns of the encroaching solar wind or great wild bull, bringing down its northern horn for the passage of the deceased king. The horns or the cups actually change their position relative to control mass ejections from the sun, producing northward and southward interplanetary magnetic fields. The major image of the great fecundating bull of the sun dominates the funerary text and the artwork and writing of many early culture. The bull depicts the powerful pressure of the solar wind ramming into the Earth's barrier along with the solar creative force. The deceased desires power over 4 winds of heaven, the 4 bulls of the sky. He detests storms and desires the pestilence of the streams be removed. For it is here at the horn or cusp that the deceased king will begin his journey to be transformed or recreated. The cusp serving as the gap on interest to an origin of reconnection and replication decoded. Horns of great wild bull equal solar wind pressure and ions at the polar cusp. Storms equal high geomagnetic activity and energy transfer of solar wind. North to Polaris. The deceased make it very clear that he rises to the height of the heaven and uses his power for himself in the afterlife. He takes the advice of the funerary text and wheels his consciousness north toward the pole star Polaris or the polar region of the sky. Here he stands at the great polar region in front of the zenith, a historical symbol which suggests a central hole or point where time moves into timelessness. To the Egyptians, the zenith may have represented the entrance to the dark duat. Nonetheless, the protected cusp area is a neutral point where the storms and pestilent streams are absent for the deceased. And it is here that he merges with the sun god, aboard Ra's ferry boat. The deceased states, I fly and soar between the two great mountains on which Ra appears. As an energy landscape, the Earth's barrier of plasma against the encroaching solar winds might easily be described as mountains of plasma branching out from the null magnetic field as the gap or cusp. Yet, along with the gap in the mountains, the deceased looks for another important energy landscape. There should be some type of ladder or stairway here at the cusp. Remarkably, according to the space physics research, one does exist. What is the Great Stairway? IS 14 through 18 reads, Dead King goes up stairway / ladder at the northern polar region of Earth, where Ra appears taking his seat in the sunbark. King now has ferry boat to the netherworld lakes Duat. The text reports that a great stairway or ladder to the sky exists at the northern cusp, a region where field lines from the magnetopause boundary on the day and night sides converge toward low altitude. Here at the element enriched pole, the pestilence of stream is removed, and the text advises the deceased to ascend to the stairway of Ra. Great Stairway is a good description of the technical state of the cusp at this neutral point where the magnetic field is zero, where solar and ionospheric ions exist, and where the energy and landscape of what space physics calls the staircase cusp forms. Referring to the opening of the duat, and the deceased king states, the two portals are open for me, and I have gone up on the stairway. What the deceased perceives as a stairway may be the staircase profile observed by scientists, that is, the potential energy landscape related to the form of the interatomic or intermolecular potential according to theory. But what exactly is this potential energy landscape the deceased perceives as a staircase or ladder? The cusp consists of a magnetic spheric field line most recently merged with the sun's interplanetary magnetic field. Space physics terms this process magnetic reconnection. Variations in the merging rate indicate the behavior of the cusp ions. Energy latitude dispersion is not always uniform, displaying dispersionless intervals and sharp jumps. Analyzing data from satellite, researchers attribute the staircase cusp signature to be this bursty merging or the reconstruction of the merging rate in the cusp. Lockwood and Smith, 1992. However, bursty and impulsive reconnection at